Is it better to drown or to burn? Would you rather get mauled by a wild animal or fade out in a hospital bed? You don't get to choose your ending, but we do know which ones are pure agony. These are the worst ways to die, according to science. Number 9. Freezing to death is actually pretty chill. Sorry. Whether it's people caught in freak weather events or some eccentric rich guy who decided to climb a mountain in a coat meant for spring, plenty people have, unfortunately, frozen to death throughout human history. However, even though becoming a human popsicle sounds like a brutal way to die, science says it's surprisingly not that bad. Hypothermia kicks in when your body temperature plummets down to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which will have you shivering and disoriented. You'll likely feel a sense of lethargy and experience a sting of cold against your skin. But the deadlier your state of hypothermia gets, the less the cold seems to affect you. The shivering stops and a sense of confusion increases. You might feel an odd sense of warmth that might make you feel almost blissful before you cross the point of no return. In some cases, you might even feel a sense of intense heat, a phenomenon that can lead to paradoxical undressing, where people freezing to death start stripping. It was even one of the eerie details at Dyatlov Pass, where hikers were found half undressed in sub-zero conditions. Our next kind of death hurts a lot more. It's a lot weirder, and it's undeniably a hell of a lot more embarrassing. Number 8. Let's continue with animals and a scientist called Dr. Death. But don't worry, he's a nice guy. This is Roger Byard, an Australian forensic pathologist who regularly encounters bizarre and unpleasant deaths. He even encountered an old woman who was murdered in cold blood by a rooster. We know, how does that even happen? He said, "There was a little old lady out the back collecting eggs. Roosters, I understand, are nasty creatures. It went for her and she had varicose veins, and it just pecked her leg. This caused the poor old woman to bleed to death while the rooster squawked and flapped at her. Humiliating for sure, but can it really qualify for the upper echelons of the worst deaths? We don't think so. But this kind of thing actually has happened more than people think, especially with varicose veins that 1 in 4 Americans have. Dr. Death also encountered cases of cats accidentally killing their owners, the exact same way as that homicidal rooster. And if you suffer from chronic venous insufficiency, this is something that's important for you to know about too. As the doc puts it, if you've got varicose veins and you get a small hole, you need to lie down and put your finger over it and elevate it, and you'll survive. What people tend to do is wander around panicking and then they bleed to death, completely unnecessary deaths. A death that is painful, unnecessary, and arguably kind of humiliating is certainly bad. But come on, science, we know you can go nastier than that, and nastier is exactly what we'll get in our next method of death. Number 7. Whether it's witches, who are mostly hanged by the way, or minor bad guys in action movies, being set on fire is definitely a pretty spectacular death. And unless you are being cremated by your own choice, it's not exactly nice to be reduced to a pile of smoking ash. But we're gonna need to go to science to answer our next big question. Despite its reputation, is it actually that bad of a way to die? To the Science Mobile to find out. A 2024 study revealed that while death by burning is definitely gruesome, you don't really feel every part of your demise. According to the study, the earliest stage begins as soon as flames come into contact with the victim's body. The fire quickly starts to burn and destroy the outermost layer of the skin, known as the epidermis. Within 5 minutes, the thicker underlying layer of skin called the dermis will begin to shrink and split open, allowing fat to drain out of the body. Your body starts to cook you from the outside in. And that is just the warm-up act. After that, your muscles start to contract, and it's painful, excruciatingly painful. Thankfully, it doesn't last long. A person turning into a human candle feels intense agony at first, but it fades. Once the nerve endings under the skin are destroyed, the pain simply stops. Anyone else in the mood for some Kentucky Fried Chicken? A death that is painful, unnecessary, and kind of humiliating is bad, but science is only getting warmed up. Number 6. If your body is found relatively quickly after drowning, it'll definitely look nicer than someone who is burned to death, if you're the vein type. But despite the oddly romanticized depiction of drowning in the media, it might actually be an even worse fate than getting the human pyro treatment. So let's ask science and check in on how exactly drowning works on a biological level. And the scariest part, your body, it tries to save you, but it ends up killing you instead. It all happens in a number of stages. First, the cessation of breathing, which the body will do automatically when it's first submerged in water. Then, after your breath is held for long enough, you'll start to experience hypoxia, where your tissues become oxygen-starved. At a point, this will lead to a loss of consciousness, and if you're not rescued, this is where you'll start sinking. From here, expect bradycardia, the slowing of your heart rate, and the aspiration of water, when water will enter your body and soak your lungs. And throughout all this, you'll be experiencing a terrifying sense of panic and suffocation over several minutes as your body exhausts itself. And the most surprising and disturbing part is the fact that compared to many of these other deaths, drowning is eerily quiet. Part of the reason so many drownings happen, it is the leading cause of accidental death in the US, is that unless you know the signs, it's easy to mistake a drowning person for someone just splashing around. They're not making noise because they don't have the oxygen to scream for help. That is some nightmare fuel for you. The problem is, a lot of the time drowning, like burning, is still ultimately such a quick process that we don't think it can be any deeper on this list. Unlike our next death, where science confirms that it goes on for hours. Number 5. Being buried alive is one of the quintessential horrifying ways to die. Sure, it wouldn't be painful in a physical sense, unless you're clawing your nails off or smashing your fists and knees against the coffin lid, but the sheer terror that you would feel waking up buried alive would be unlike anything else. But here is where the scientific fun kicks in. How long would it actually take you to die if you were buried alive? Because that definitely factors into just how truly awful this really is. Interestingly, there isn't as firm a scientific consensus on this as you might expect, mainly because a lot of factors influence how fast someone would die in a subterranean box. It mostly comes down to the coffin size, so let's translate that horror into something measurable: the actual minutes of air you would have. Your industry standard coffin has a volume of around 886 liters, and then you can subtract the average volume of a human body, 66 liters, and that leaves you with 820 liters of air, around 20% of which is oxygen, which you need to survive while trapped in a buried coffin. If you consume half a liter of oxygen per minute, that would give you 5.5 hours to slowly pass away while panicking in the dark. That is a long time to be suffering, if you really crunch those numbers. However, there is a slight silver lining that science can also provide when it comes to death by live burial or vivisepulture, if you want to get all fancy about it. When you breathe in oxygen, your panicked, terrified body quickly turns it into carbon dioxide, which you then breathe out, slowly filling the coffin with it. The pall of carbon dioxide will slowly make you feel dizzy, sleepy, and eventually knock you out entirely before the Reaper rips out your soul. According to Alan R. Leff, the professor emeritus at University of Chicago in the Pulmonary and Critical Care Department, there is nothing someone buried alive could do. You might feel the suffocation, and it would obviously be terrifying, Leff says, but at the very least, you wouldn't be conscious during the last moments. Thank you for the comforting words, Professor. But the horrifying nature of our next death, as confirmed by science, will provide you with no comfort whatsoever. Number 4. No matter what profiteers of fad diets will tell you, people need food. It's one of our most foundational requirements, but people can't always get it. Whether it's because of economic poverty or being the victim of famine and genocide, starvation is sadly a state shared by hundreds of millions, if not billions, over the course of human history. And any scientist can tell you from both historical reports and instances of it happening right now, starving is a really awful way to die. While the exact amount of time without food it takes to die will vary massively depending on the person and their unique physiological needs, the average seems to be around 3 weeks. It's not really something that scientists can test in a controlled environment, given that it goes against the whole ethics thing to starve people to death for a study. First, your body will begin eating its own fat and muscle. As your brain loses energy, you'll begin to experience psychological problems. The body slows down as it tries to preserve energy for your vital organs. You'll begin to bloat, you'll become gaunt and weak, and likely to experience nausea and vomiting. The physical toll that starvation takes on your body is so intense that if food is introduced too quickly, you might also die from a condition called refeeding syndrome, which sadly happened to many people rescued from concentration camps in World War II. Dr. Omar Abdel Manan, a British-Egyptian pediatrician and neurologist, has said, "It is a very cruel, slow death. You are basically just wasting away." And somehow we can think of 3 even worse ways to die. Say, are you thirsty? You won't be if you're on track toward our next gruesome death. Number 3. If you end up on the wrong side of a fox, a bat, or even an overly aggressive squirrel that isn't quite acting right, and you're not up to date on your vaccinations, you might be staring down one of the world's most feared diseases, rabies. Dog bites and scratches are responsible for about 99% of human rabies contractions, and the disease kills tens of thousands of people each year. If you get attacked by a rabid dog, you need to get to a hospital as quickly as possible to receive PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. If you don't happen to get that, you've got 2 possible adventures to choose from: furious rabies and paralytic rabies. And both are absolutely horrifying ways to go. According to the World Health Organization, furious rabies accounts for 80% of the cases. It results in hyperactivity, excitable behavior, hallucinations, lack of coordination, fear of water, and fear of drafts or fresh air. Nobody survives having it for more than a few days before cardiorespiratory arrest takes their life. But there is a much rarer paralytic rabies. Slower, quieter, and somehow even more disturbing. Muscles become paralyzed from the wound site outward until you slip into a coma and die. In either case, you're in for a nasty and protracted demise. But what two deaths could possibly be worse a way to die than rabies? A disease that supposedly boasts a 100% fatality rate if allowed to mature. Thankfully, science has answers, and you're gonna have nightmares. Number 2. If you've been in the wake of a nuclear catastrophe, it's no secret that you are probably gonna have a really horrifying death. You'd rather be set on fire or drowned than exposed to a massive dose of good old ionizing radiation. And if you're saddled with acute radiation sickness, you're gonna experience some pretty nightmarish conditions before you eventually kick it off the mortal coil. A large dose can send you to the grave within hours or months, which will quickly land you with more syndromes than an Incredibles cosplay party. 3 specifically: cerebrovascular syndrome, gastrointestinal syndrome, and hematopoietic syndrome. This means that the flow of the blood to your brain, your ability to successfully digest food, and your ability to create new blood cells, which your body really needs to run successfully. Oh, and that is just where the fun begins. Things are gonna be even nastier for you as you approach death by hours or days. You can expect projectile vomiting, rectal bleeding, bleeding in your vomit, diarrhea, probably with blood, fever, burning skin, confusion, and hair loss. It's gonna be a really bad time, all things considered. In 1999, Hisashi Ouchi, a Japanese power plant worker, was purifying uranium oxide when an accident exposed him to an unimaginably high dose of dangerous radiation. It would lead to his death over 80 days after the initial exposure. The details of the case are undeniably disturbing. His lymphatic blood cell count dropped to almost zero. His bone marrow was effectively vaporized. He dealt with nausea, dehydration, and diarrhea. While it seemed that there might be some possibility of saving him on the first day, things went quickly and nightmarishly downhill. The radiation sickness was breaking down his cells on the road to completely annihilating his DNA, meaning his body couldn't create any more cells to repair the damage. The outer layer of his skin slowly degraded. He was unable to talk, eat, and after a point he slipped into total unconsciousness until he died of multiple organ failure after 83 days. It is worth mentioning that this is undeniably one of the most iconic, disturbing deaths in medical history, and it was undoubtedly an extremely painful experience for Ouchi. However, the one silver lining is that he was basically dead to the world for the latter weeks of his terminal experience, so he wouldn't have been actively suffering the whole time. It's one of the most medically documented horrors ever recorded, and yet, unbelievably, there is still one way to die that experts say is even worse. Number 1. This brings us to the king of terrors, the most horrifying and painful of all deaths according to scientific experts. And it's not only the one with the broadest scientific consensus for pain, it's also one that you are most likely to actually experience: death in hospital from a protracted illness. The 2 most common deaths in the United States are heart disease, which claims almost 681,000 lives per year, and our old pal cancer, which has a respectable annual kill count of nearly 613,000. In fact, the only non-disease entry in the top 5 leading causes of death for Americans is accidents, in case you were wondering. After that, it's back to the old gruesome stuff: cerebrovascular diseases and chronic lower respiratory diseases. Suffice to say, protracted diseases kill a lot of Americans, and even the so-called quick disease-related deaths are actually pretty slow and miserable. Just ask an expert like Joanne Lynn, a physician and palliative care specialist, who said, "People believe that they'll know when they're coming to their final days, weeks, or months. But most of us come to the end of our lives very incrementally. We keep pretending that people will die of a heart attack overnight, but that is not reality. People want a sense of control in their life. They want freedom of movement and to make decisions that'll dictate how their life will go. But when faced with chronic, debilitating, and terminal illnesses, those are the first things you'll likely lose. And it's something hundreds of thousands of unfortunate folks in America alone are losing every single day. Your existence becomes a cycle of constant pain management, fading energy, and diminishing physical strength, and in the worst cases, a total loss of physical ability or even your mind. And you're probably familiar with the most nightmarish version of this slow decline. Alzheimer's disease ranks among the top 10 causes of death overall. It is the 5th leading cause of death for adults over 65 and the 6th leading cause of death for adults nationwide. You would need to be living under a truly blissful rock to not be aware of the ravages of this particular degenerative neurological disease. Dementia slowly erodes your mind, destroys your memories, and annihilates your connections to the people and the world around you. You'll die an absent shell of your former self, finding the world around you to be confusing and terrifying. But how does Alzheimer's actually kill you, you might be wondering? Science has a deeply upsetting answer there too. On the outside, you'll see a cognitive collapse that leaves the afflicted person increasingly alien from you. But on the inside, when you suffer from Alzheimer's, your brain is quite literally rotting. You'll be experiencing neurological tissue death, nerve death, abnormal protein clumps, and shrinkage of the brain's size as the condition progresses. And because people suffering from Alzheimer's are generally, though not always, a lot older, they'll typically be dealing with a bevy of other health issues, all made worse by a cognitively impaired person's inability to know what's going on. By the last stages of the disease, you'll have trouble eating, drinking, dressing yourself, communicating, and performing basic personal hygiene. You'll need to be under 24-hour care as the Reaper stalks you, all while having no idea of what's actually going on. By the end, the body becomes fragile in ways most people never imagine. The specifics of an Alzheimer's death can vary, but the most common form of death is aspiration pneumonia. That's because difficulty swallowing means you're likely to inhale tiny particles of food into your lungs, where they'll become breeding grounds for bacteria. This leads to painful, often deadly infections that essentially cause you to drown above water. In many ways, it's a death that fuses some of the worst parts of all the others and makes it worse by transforming you into a psychological ghost. The day may come years from now when the memory of watching this video means as little to you as your own name, as your brain and body trap you in a terrible tomb long before you die. Still got an appetite for death? Why not check out what happens to your body after you die? Or watch this instead.